And Zoom likes to let you know in an American accent that we're now recording. So, you know.
I'm back.
Vulindlela, how's it?
Good.
I'm glad to see you take your as far as we know, the pandemic is not carried over Zoom waves, you know, but
no, I'm glad. That's a relief.
So maybe just to start off by saying thanks to everyone for responding to the emails and for the blurb, and that I've now uploaded the three dialogue sessions to Andrea's thing, and then I think I sent the OneDrive link through to all of you. Sorry. So I'm not. So I mean, obviously, I'm not assuming that you've been able to go through all three sessions. I myself haven't done it, but we did end off on a very interesting point last time, where we were talking about racism and who's a racist and who's not a racist. And I'd ended by saying that I was a racist, and that I thought maybe that would be a useful point to start again the discussion, just in terms of, you know, so we had debated whether black people can be racist, and the CRT view, or the American CRT view, put it that way, is very much that there's a structural element to racism, and if you're not in the power group, you can't be racist as a consequence. And there was some debate amongst us with regards to that. Then I maintain that I am racist by virtue of the fact that I'm a white person who's grown up in South Africa, who has benefited from that system, even though I am not consciously racist. And I would be aghast if I ever addressed someone of a different color in any disrespectful way or such. But I acknowledge that there are things that I do that I do unintentionally, in the sense that I assume certain things as normal, and those normal things aren't necessarily universally normal in the sense of that all South Africans share that, you know. And the older I become, the more I realize just how different sometimes those experiences are, you know. And particularly when I, you know, with the political thing that we're doing, I manage this social media side of our stuff, and just the pictures that I take, you know, I have to be very careful in terms of just the very pictures that I take and where I take those pictures, that there's a balance, or there's a range of views, because you can't avoid having a view, but you have to have a range of views, you know, not to, you know, and how many people have come back and said, okay, but you guys are just middle class, or you white, or you black, or you know, and we've had a range of feedback on that. And to me, it's been fascinating, you know, just how people, based on the photographs that you take, or the issues that you highlight, how that seemed to be aligned to a specific group within South Africa. So so I mean, I thought maybe we could start there. I don't know if anyone else has anything that's occurred to them during the course of the week, but just to say thanks to everyone.
I have. Oh, hello.
Do you want to go first, Vully?
I remember it was like when Gary was started speaking, I was like, oh yes, Nehemiah and I were going at it. Yeah, okay. So no, I am still in that space to continue that conversation about, you know, things that you're saying, in some ways, like that there's a systemic thing, and then there's almost a kind of like automatic space of ownership of how that system works, and that kind of then denotes you as a racist automatically. Something did happen this week that kind of made me think a little about what it means to be someone who can call something when they see it. So at this point in time, I'm referencing a kind of conversation that's been happening around gender and sexuality and trans and so forth. And of late, someone who I kind of admired, well, I suppose I don't know if I do right now, but Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi, she was like, she came up recently and said that there's a kind of overly critical and punishing nature of call-out culture, particularly when people are referred to around, you know, J.K. Rowling and herself now with that stance of, you know, trans women are not women, you know, you have to have a period if you are a woman naturally. So there's that kind of like wrestling around it, and the sense of like calling someone out in the same way for something like race, or I'm hoping that I'm making sense here, but is there's a space in which certain voices, based on the systemic oppression of people, of whatever ilk they are, there's a point at which all of those voices have to be heard. Is there not? To say like there's a narrative that has been controlled by a dominant narrative, such as patriarchy or race, and the moment that you challenge that within the space of, you know, trans voices are saying, actually, we do want to declare ourselves women, and women turn around and say, no, but you can't because you're not women. Does that not denote that that is a continuance of the oppressive status? Because at some point, surely everyone should be heard. Part of that dominant narrative, you don't see what dominance you're exerting over people. So I'm interested in that kind of like the hidden and the sort of the space of how it works, again, beneath that surface stuff. So we can call it systemic, you can call it owned, you can call it privilege and all the rest, but then when it comes to that issue of like someone coming up to you and saying, I'm a racist, and you go like, no, I'm not, you know, I want to defend myself, I'm not a racist. And you go like, but maybe you are, because what you're using, even in that discourse of denial, could be an acknowledgement of the power structure that retains a need for that person to say, but you're being racist. I don't know if I'm making sense there.
No. I think I can piggyback off what Vuli is saying, because I think where our argument came in last week was an issue of language, right? We had an issue of language, because I stepped away and I reflected on that, and I realized that it was an issue of language. We weren't necessarily disagreeing with each other, but we were talking about the language and how do we forward the language, right? And Gary, I want to highlight here that we speak a lot about how the context of America and South Africa is slightly different, right? But we kind of missed it in this sense. We kind of missed a nuance in this sense. Remember, in South Africa, where we have a dominant race of color, as opposed to in America, where we have a dominant race of non-color, or what this one TikToker calls PWC, people without color. I thought it was very interesting. So she's taken it as an activist move to call white people PWC, the same as white people call people of color POC. So it's like a form of activism, and I kind of thought it was funny. Yeah, but it was this concept of the language around racism, that how we've come to define racism is on the basis of a system, right? Because of the ism suffix of the word, right? An oppressive system that enables power, and that then there are certain truths about the South African context when we look at it in that way, right? Because I mean, on a substantial level, the ANC is kind of in power currently, right? They are making decisions as a predominantly Black body. Where these decisions come from and how they are influenced, we might not know what influences these, but a predominantly Black body is making these decisions or exerting this power in the system currently, you know? And so I was thinking around the concepts of how do we reconcile that? Is it racial bias? Is it racial prejudice? Could the scales have tilted? But then when we look at a larger societal sentiment of South Africa, that is true for a particular class of people, right? But for the majority of the population, that's not necessarily the truth of the matter, right? Nehemiah, Vuli, and Danai, with her access to the community group chat group, it's quite a different story for us compared to someone in Motherwell, to someone in Galvindale. It's quite a different lived experience, and the extent to which transformation or upliftment of those people have happened has largely been stunted, is largely still in a and after apartheid state, in terms of wealth accumulation, access, and things like that. They kind of stunted there with not that movement forward, right? And so I think there's a lot to think about there. And I actually had an interesting conversation with a colleague of mine in the lab following that really made me think about, okay, so when we are thinking complexly about race, right? We've invited ourselves into this space where we're supposed to be thinking complexly about race and not try to get locked within our own biases, right? Or within our own lived experiences. Then is there room for multiple truths within the discourse, right? Particularly when we think about race in the context of intersectionality, like Vulindlela said, Chimamanda Adichie's feminism, a long time I've reconciled with it, that I like the artist, but I don't like the person, right? Because her feminism it pretends to be an Afro-feminism, but then it presents itself very as the mainstream white feminist feminism, where it is exclusionary, where it favors voices above voices. So Chimamanda Adichie's expression of a feminism is no different than a white feminist, female feminist, not seeing Black feminists, or not supporting Black Lives Matter for that instance, right? Because we have to allow for these concepts that as we travel these complex spaces, that there are going to be multiple truths to people. I can be a queer male, but I can also be a racist, right? I can be an ally of a particular group of people. Maybe I can be a vegan and I can still and I could still be a racist, right? So we have to open these doors up to these multiple truths. And now when we are sitting with them, how do we kind of reconcile them? Because something occurred to me that many a times when we talk about race, we tend to give certain things the forefront, right? So we are saying we are trying to fix race. So now we are going to focus on Black and white, but then we forget about male and female in that concept. And I don't think life works in cubicles. Everything is happening at the same time. So when we are starting to come to the forefront of this conversation, then we have to not repeat the mistakes that we did in the past, where we kind of emancipated the Black man, but left the Black woman behind. She's still oppressed. We are talking about discussions about the land, but in the same notions of the land, there are Pan-Africanists who will tell Danai that, remember, you can't inherit the land because you are not a male. I can inherit the land because I'm a male, as if she is not a descendant of that space, as if she is not, and this is by virtue of a patriarchal system. Nonetheless, it's no other doing, right? Because if we equate that to the concept of dowries were being paid for women, right? Dowries or lobola was paid for women, and that was seen as a commodity that was attached to women, right? In the same way that the land was attached to men, right? And so I think that when we start to have these types of conversations, we really need to be certain that we are not prefacing something while excluding or disregarding another, So this concept of multiple truths was really enlightening for me. If I'm allowed 2 more minutes, I'd like to just extend on that conversation that I had. I had a conversation with a colored male, a colleague of mine, who had some really interesting things to say about race that made me really step back and think, why didn't I see it? Or maybe I identify I identify as a black South African and not as a colored South African. So those have never been pressing issues for me in the same way that it has been pressing issues for him, or for the sense that I am, if you will, I'm passing in the system, right? I can go into a Black conversation and speak Xhosa and I can be accepted there as Black. I can go into an interview tomorrow and I can speak Xhosa with the panelist and she would be like, "Hi, umnyama loa, give him the job," you know, BE. I am passing in that system, although my birth certificate says colored, my apartheid birth certificate says colored, you know. So I really wanted to lean into these things, but I didn't want to lean into them and telling him that, you're wrong. You see, this is how the structure works. This is how it is. So I spent some time listening to him and I thought that, maybe there is validity to, because he left that conversation feeling heard, feeling seen. We exchanged some things. I was receptive to some things he was saying. He was receptive to others that I was saying. It was a really interesting conversation to have with a scientist who I assume is not reading critical race theory, who is not engaging based on the type of dialogue that we are having. So I thought that was really interesting, and that the concept of multiple truths, both in the context of intersectionality, but also in the context of race itself. And what does that mean towards solution, towards a problem solving, or towards finding new ways of thinking and engaging, you know?
Nehemiah, thanks for that. Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to pick up on this thing of where the solution lies, and I don't think, and I mean, it's something I've said before, but I don't think that the focus on race per se is how you solve the problem. I think the focus is on difference and sameness, and how it structures itself within a society, you know, and that if you're wanting to undo that, you have to understand the mechanism that makes it happen in the first place, you know, because simply what you will do is just perpetuate one system with the other. But there was a thought that occurred to me whilst you were chatting, and you know, if I remember my Fanon correctly, Fanon had spoken about when post-revolution times, that the societies that emerged in the sort of first phase of that post-revolution were very similar to the societies that they had undone. That you had black leaders who simply just perpetuated what the white colonialists had done prior to that. You know, and I was wondering if whiteness, and I say it reservedly because I haven't thought a lot about it, but whether whiteness as an idea is something that can be owned by people that are not necessarily of white skin.
Yes, of course it can. Yes, definitely. Definitely. I think that, you know, that's the one thing. I mean, you know, we can come down to I suppose when Nehemiah is referring to the idea of passing and, you know, being able to intersect into certain spaces, you know, if we're going to go, Danai, we go to Kumusha, you know, you have to kind of like, you dial yourself back a little bit, because you're a city dweller. Yes. You got to go like, okay, now I must not do certain things. I'm going to sit on the grass mat and I'm going to go, you know, wake up, you know, you do all the ceremonial things. But then at the same time, there's also that space of like, am I urban enough? Am I urban in the American sense of, am I black enough? Or do I listen to the right type of music, for instance? And then you go through these kind of like real existential crises in that, say you've grown up listening to rock or new wave or whatever it is from the 80s, and all of a sudden someone says, why are you listening to Brian Adam? And or why, you know, and you might be at a place where they play music that you would have identified as, okay, I didn't like that music because I didn't like R&B, but all of a sudden people are like, you don't know the song by Keith Sweat? You're not black, you know? And, you know, like you kind of go, you know, there is that sense of, and it comes down to Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, then, you know, those sort of sentiments of, you know, where what do you ascribe your values of social currency? Is it the white skin? Is it the white behavior? Is it the white food? Or is it the whatchamacallit? So there's a whole range of things, Gary, being called a bougie black, being called a coconut, being called a whatever it is, you know, those things are, yeah, being salad, yeah, or I don't know, being, and on the Asian sense, you might be called a banana or something like that. You know, those are not nice words. You know, you're an Oreo. You know, and, yeah, and you kind of like go, how does that work within the structure of, okay, so whiteness is a thing, and then there's also quite this other devastatingly punishing space of like, you're not going to be black enough if you do these sorts of things, and it's like annoying. I mean, is Nehemiah the same colored as Glenn sitting here? And is Glenn colored enough with his accent, for instance? Oh, I speak so well, you know, and maybe that's why I get on with Glenn. I speak so well, you know. So there's kind of like that an understanding of whiteness, and it's like you go like, I signed up at the gym today, and this poor woman, she was like a colored woman, and she was okay, great, it's wonderful to have you sign up. And I was like, okay, I need to do this and this. And she was like, your accent is just so nice. You sound so good with the accent. I was like, thank you. And I didn't know whether that was to take that as you speak
a compliment or not.
Yeah. It's actually quite damaging. It's a microaggression to give that compliment sometimes. So I think there is an invisibility to whiteness that is transferable to behaviors, expectations, and social cultures. You can be white without being white.
Can you then be black?
And you can
you be black without being black?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can. It's
yes,
not socially acceptable because it's cultural appropriation. But you can.
I wanted to add to what Billy was saying, and just to also respond to what you posed, Gary. You can be white without being white, but you can also be received as white without being white. And there was an experience, it was such a strange experience, but my mom and her friend, a white lady, there was something happening at church, and there was I don't know, it was a gathering of women at church, and most of the white ladies had left earlier. And at some point, it was my mom and her friend. She was the only white lady left in the room, and all the other ladies that remained were black ladies or women of color. And my mom said her friend turned to her, and I mean, she's a wonderful lady. Like, she's like my second mother. She's a wonderful lady. So, you know, I don't want to paint her in a bad light, but she made the very interesting comment, because she turned to my mom and she like whispered and she said, "Oh, Dorothy, you know, we're the only white people left here."
What?
And my mom turned to her and said, "What?" And it was so, I don't know whether it surprised her, or it was obviously shocking to her to have to be referred in that way, and not necessarily offensive, but just it was a shock to her that she felt like, oh, we're the only two white people left in the room. And then and we talked about it. So it was my mom, myself, and my sister, and we kind of talked about it, and we came to the conclusion that I don't know how to explain this, but our whiteness is very comfortable for a lot of white people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as a result of that, you are not seen as a black person. And so I don't know if that makes sense, but
100%.
I can be in a room with a bunch of white people and they will not see me as, oh, there's a Black person in the room, because of the way I articulate, because of the way I behave, because I am not your stereotypical Black person. And so as far as they are concerned, I am one of them. And in that moment, for my mom and her friend felt like my mom was one of them. And her first, it just naturally came out of her mouth to say, oh, we're the only two white people left. And it's not that my mom has she sounds like a Black lady from Zim. Her accent isn't necessarily, it's not very heavy. She was a school teacher, but she does not sound like a white person.
Yeah.
As in comparison to me. So if I'm on the phone with someone would have to, take a double take to make sure that they're talking to a Black person. So she doesn't sound like me, but she, in other senses, presents herself as a white person. So she has a level of whiteness that is comfortable for white people, and they don't feel like, they don't have the discomfort of having to interact with a Black person and, be politically correct and, tiptoe around certain issues and so that was very interesting, an interesting experience and an interesting discussion we had, because we even spoke about, like, my sister and I and all my sisters having gone to the schools that we've gone to and having grown up, having been raised the way we were raised. And in a sense, it was purposeful. My parents, we spoke English at home rather than, speaking English only at school or only outside of the house and speaking only Shona at home. But they did that intentionally to enable us to, I don't know if it was, I don't want to use the word intentional, but there was some purpose in how they raised us, so that, as Nehemiah said, we could pass. We could fit anywhere. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that experience because I thought it was it's such an interesting thing, this concept of whiteness and us. Yeah. Anyway, I'm rambling now. Sorry.
May I piggyback on that? I want to hear from Glenn, of course, within something. Maybe he will have a comment on what I'm about to say. But it just occurred to me that there's always been the perception, and I watched this really terrifying movie last night called The Nightingale. If you can get to watch it, it's great. I'm adding it to my resources of movies for students to watch. It's not to be faint of heart. So, not for the faint of heart. I'll tell you more about it in a moment, but maybe I should just kind of give you the premise. So, please forgive me. I interpret the world through social culture and movies and music, and that's my kind of lens. This film is set in 1825 in Tasmania, or Van Diemen's Land, where the Brits would send the Irish convicts to work off their sentence. And it's about a woman and her husband and a baby who live in this kind of controlled village. It's controlled by, or a settlement controlled by British soldiers who are rampant, disgusting, horrible, violent patriarchs. And there's something happens and she loses her family and she goes out looking for revenge. And along the way, she meets this native Tasmanian or Aboriginal tracker who goes with her. And there's kind of like conflict between the oppressed Black person, which is what they refer to in the movie, and this woman who is also seen to be kind of like the scum of the earth on the British side. And I think just watch it, the intensity of the identification of oppression in that, or the levels of that, are quite exciting. So if you can watch The Nightingale, I would recommend it. But as we were talking now, Danai, I was just thinking about the other side of it, in the Fanani and sort of schizophrenic space of like where I was bluntly using myself as an example, because I mean, I grew up listening to a lot of music that would have been considered white, Spandau Ballet, goodness me, and all the rest of it, Human League, I liked electronica, Pet Shop Boys. Those were my people that I grew up with. And only within the latter part, and I'm going to be honest here, within the latter part of my latter part of my 30s, perhaps, did I start cottoning onto, or at least music that was considered Black. I mean, there were a couple of songs here and there and all the rest of it, but discovering Kaifa Semenya and Litambulu and all those people, local South African people, I'd grown up with them, but it was always seen as like, that's what my parents do when they try to reclaim themselves from the colonists. They have these little Stockwells in their party. I was quite happy listening to Nirvana, AC/DC, and all the rest of them. And that's what it was. Then there's this kind of double entendre, this very strange complexity that happens. I mean, right now I'm listening to Sun El musician, and his wonderful stuff, that he's got. And the moment that you kind of put it on, and there's a white person that you might know, like a dear friend of mine, and they'll be like, "What are you listening to?" And I'm like, here, let's listen to Placebo. And you kind of like, and I've written down here, because as you were speaking, something just occurred to me, and I had said, levels of whiteness are ascendant. They are ascendant. The idea of Blackness and attributive qualities become descendant. And so whatever it is, like Gary's saying, can a person who's white be Black? Yeah, there's kind of like the overall perception of like, look at that white guy. He's kind of like, oh, he's in touch with the Blacks, Johnny Clegg, white Zulu. Johnny Clegg is one white Zulu, whereas there's thousands of us who have learned to speak English the way we do. And so I would say that's kind of like where the conversation really sort of revolves around, that there's a kind of an inherent ascendancy of all these moments of whiteness make you're ascribing for the bed. I moved into the suburbs. I can afford 2 dogs. I have a pool. I'm the good Black. I'm not going to slaughter my cow in the back, Or if I'm having guests around, gosh, there's too many people here. They're going to think I'm a noisy Black person. Oh, my neighbors. Oh, my neighbors. So there is that crisis. And I'll stop there, because I'd like to give Glenn some time to speak, particularly about the music thing, Glenn.
Well, thanks, Willie. Gary, you've touched on something very interesting here. And yes, you've seen it's affected us as people of color, because you're absolutely right. I do agree that whiteness can be owned by folks who are not necessarily born into white families or into white bodies. And I've been very successful in my life with that. I've exploited it immensely. Actually, I was very astutely aware as a young boy that whiteness is a sense of being. You see, it's a how one embodies a particular character or archetype of what society deems as valuable. And as a young boy, I mean, I was really the colonial prodigy in terms of being a sponge for all of the colonial rhetoric, because my grandmother raised me, and she was possibly 70 years older than me. And she came from that era of King George and all of the rest of them. And the British monarchy and the vehicle of royalty was a real mechanism by which we as people of color were given the stature of what whiteness looked like. And I, as a young boy, was kind of conditioned to believe, can you see again how white people have positioned what they call being civilized, being cultured, being somebody who's got etiquette, knows how to portray themselves, how to dress the body, how to respectably engage with people around them, how to just use the body as a mechanism of stature, even in the absence of saying anything, through posture, through dress. So I've been able to sort of relate to what a lot of you have been saying, especially Danai, when she says that, for example, other white people perceive you as being white, actually. Even though you may have a darker skin tone than them, they've now seen beyond your skin color to what you're embodying. So I would link it. I won't speak so much towards the music, Willie, but to speak about this idea of just as a musician would embody a particular type of genre or a particular type of technique or skill set for wanting to play jazz or classical music, we as humans are doing the exact same thing with embodying race. So even though I keep coming back to this idea, or I don't like people saying, well, it's not a real thing, because it's a social construct, and you've heard me being very passionate to sort of give a pushback against it. And this is one of the reasons why it's so real that each one of us is embodying race. And to come back to your point, Gary, it's much easier for Black people to embody whiteness than for white people to embody Blackness. Yeah. And I've struggled personally with embodying Blackness because I've cultivated whiteness so strongly that it's meant that because I've been so successful with it, and the reward was being accepted by white people, the price was being rejected by Black people. And so that is why when Vuli says, when you are having to code switch into Blackness, you immediately start checking just your posture, the way you dress, how you're going to speak, how you're going to hold that plate of food in your hands when you're around other white people, whereas you might make sure that you had the knife and fork in the right hand if you're around white people in company, for example. All of those things are playing in the back of their minds. And what I have noticed, though, is what becomes very off-putting to white people is when they've seen this person of color, they've now seen beyond the racialized body, accepted the person as thinking, this is actually a white consciousness being in a Black body. Then when you do tap into your Black consciousness, it affects those people quite severely when they feel that, well, now you might be betraying the trust which has been afforded to you by being granted permission to be part of the inside group. And as I said, I really played it on both sides of the fence, where I've definitely encouraged white people to accept me because of my accent, because of the lighter skin color, because of the education, because of how I control the body. But I don't find it as easy with Black people. With Black people, even colored people, I immediately feel this is something I'm going to have to deliberately put my mind into a particular type of gear now to say, you have to act this way, or don't do this, don't say that, for fear of putting off your brothers and sisters of color who might say, look at this coconut, look at this one who's trying to be what he actually isn't. Whereas my argument is, no, this is who I really am. It's a process of however many years you've been alive, what communities you've been exposed to, the type of home you grew up in, the type of church you went to, all of these things have influenced it. But I do think it's much more difficult to perform Blackness than it is to perform whiteness.
So I mean, Glenn, thank you very much and Danai and Vulindlela and Nehemiah for sharing that. I mean, that's, I mean, I've seen it operate in white circles. I've seen Black people into white circles and the mood relax as that person speaks, and articulates themselves in an accent that is, oh my goodness, that's a nice accent that you have, and I'm horrified at those times, I mean, but the question for me is this, is that I understand, that as an outsider trying to assimilate into that group, the signals from the group are very strong, so like the signal, the accent and how you hold your cup, and what music you listen to and how you drink your tea. And, I mean, there's that classic photograph of Dermot Peterson. I don't know if you remember it, of her licking the cup. And that was seen as such an insult, but I mean, my Afrikaner heritage, people would pour tea into the saucer and drink from the saucer, I mean, so, so how that happened, I'm not entirely sure. And that's the question for me is, where did I learn whiteness from? Where did I learn that assimilation thing that you experience as you're trying to enter the group? I mean, I didn't go to a white school. I mean, I went to a white school, but I didn't go to a school of whiteness, put it that way, but, but and that's why I say that I'm racist, is that because I'm not aware of a lot of that stuff, and
Gary, I think someone that really brings important perspective to this. I think James Baldwin did it, but I think Toni Morrison became very successful at doing it, is this concept of the white gaze, right? To describe or to distinguish between this, or introducing this term called the white gaze.
Yes.
So the world as we know it, because of the structure of the world, she describes that we see the world through the gaze of a white man, right? White man specifically.
Yeah.
So the way in which stories are told on the television, the way in which who is represented in a specific conversation, you know, these things that we call, Vuli speaks about this kind of movies, seeing the world through movies, and so that discourse analysis there, the different tropes that emerge, you know, the black mammy figure, the guide helping Tasmanian uncivilized being who knows the land, who's meant to guide, you know, because that's the role they have been fitted into by society. And I think it's because of that Black people are so trained at whiteness. We are so trained at whiteness because we see it everywhere. We are told to actually to assimilate to it, right? When I grew up, our television, people who grew up between the 90s and 2010s only got to see American programming on their television. SABC One played predominantly American programming. ETV played American programming, right? And so these are all of this information that we inherited that taught us our place in the world, that taught us what to assimilate to. So success was inherently associated with a bougie lifestyle. If you are bougie and you speak a specific way and you assimilate yourself a certain way in society, you can be successful, right? In American TV, those tropes that we see of people of color, the damaging tropes that, okay, people of color are the assistants, they are the best friend, they are the maids in the household, you know, they are struggling. The only real access that we had to successful Black culture being portrayed on television was the Cosbys, you know, that was the only thing we saw. And we know how that history now is being eradicated by whatever it is that happened there. But those were the only things that we saw on television. And so how then not, don't I, as a Black person, try to assimilate to that in terms of solidifying myself in the society, in terms of portraying myself as a success? How do you then, as a white person, not see a Black person as lesser? Because that's what you are, that's what you see, that's what you consume on a daily basis. They are the best friend, they are the maid, they are this. And so all of these things, in a sense, is inherited by the system of what is fed through us, through what we see, what we hear, the type of stories we engage with. And I think Toni Morrison was very decisive in her move, in her books, to decentralize whiteness. She decentralized whiteness. So if a white person was in the story, they were either an accessory to the story, but they weren't the story. They didn't form part of the story. If a white person was meant to be there, he's the master that's seen from the peripheral vision, but he never enters the story as a character or a main or a lead, you know? And I think that's why what we talk about essentially is respectability politics, right? Those concepts of I am assimilating to the system, and so therefore I am respected in the system. And therefore you will get those instances where your colleagues will ask you, oh, so you're one of those people. It's like their eyes have just been opened to the traitor that you actually are. Yeah, they thought you were one of them, and now they're like, oh, so you are one of those people, is the response you get when you kind of try to canvas for issues of Blackness also in certain spaces. So I don't know if I made myself clear, but I was trying to link this respectability politics to the white gaze, and how we see that playing out in society.
Can I jump in quickly? I hear exactly what you're saying, and while you were talking, Nehemiah, I was kind of thinking back to Gary's question as well. It's like, you know, where did I learn to be? He asked, where did I learn to be white? Where's the school of white? And I think, you know, Nehemiah, you mentioned earlier on that we can't. I'm getting kind of worried about us in the way that we're talking, because in the chat I kind of say we shouldn't necessarily look at whiteness as this monolith. Much like all cultures, that thing of whiteness is an evolution in itself, and it's constantly evolving. And I think it also spins off into different it's like a river, it's like a delta, and it splits. I was going to use the example of a hydra, but I don't know if that's okay. Maybe it is more apt, I don't know. So there's kind of a thing around that, because how the lens I'm looking at the world through is within visual culture. That's how I understand it. How people tell their stories, the hermeneutics of it all. You know, how people visualize and respond to the thing. Because these are the first things that tell us that something is up. When you see someone, your eyes kind of say, oh, okay, skin tone, recognize danger, whatever it is, and so forth. Now, if I can kind of just try and put it in an easy way, because it's in my head, it's like buzzing bees. There are many aspects to whiteness, as there are many aspects to being gay. There are many aspects to being black, and so forth. And I think learning the tropes of, or how that all coalesces to be how white you are, comes into how much are you invested in those particular mechanisms that make whiteness whiteness. So you might think capitalism, so therefore owning all the material things that are attributed to whiteness, the Gucci clothes, the things that come from Italy and all the rest of it. However, that's not only that's not the only thing. It could be the good job. I went and became a lawyer, or I've got a house in the suburbs. I've got a house in the Hamptons or something like that. I don't know. So there's that monetary thing. Then there's the other aspect of like your education, your intellectual capacity. You know, where did you go to school? Who taught you how to speak this way? And I've invested in that because I did drama, I did public speaking and all the rest of it. So yeah, I was able to like learn that stuff. I mean, Glenn's invested in his hands and music and those are the qualities ascribed to a particular thing. Did Glenn invest time in learning the mbira? No, he learned the piano. Did I invest time in learning stone sculpture, Zimbabwean stone sculpture, which in itself is problematic? No, I ended up as a printmaker. So the values and the sort of things that kind of coalesce eventually to kind of like brand you within a sort of type of whiteness, not a whiteness, but as a type of whiteness. So I can't necessarily say that we are doing this the right way if we're talking about whiteness. Maybe you should refer to types of whiteness. And again, it's that ascendancy, because it's not everyone who's going to be on the same level of how close you are to those pearly gates of whiteness. You're not just going to get in one day and be white, but I will never get in to be white. Never. Because the last shackle on that, the last quality of whiteness comes down to the lightness of my skin. That's at the most basis. But I can still coalesce a lot of other things around me to work with whiteness, to become kind of a type of whiteness. So there's those things work internally. You start kind of like having my real worry is that psycho space where you go, the schizophrenic space where you criticize yourself for not being, you're becoming, you know, hold yourself a certain way, do not be threatening, do not talk loudly, laugh like that, you know, and kind of, and it's like the moment that, you know, the people start playing quiet at your party, you're like, whoa, guys, no, hey, yeah, you might well keep it down. And then it's like, oh, but then you'll put on a rock set and you're playing it loud because everyone loves it. And then you know, oh, my fingers are down a little bit, please. And you know, you kind of,
or Sweet Caroline.
Oh, Sweet Caroline. Oh, everyone's shouting Sweet Caroline, guys. So I think that's the space I want to end at, but there was something else. Oh yeah, there is that ascendancy of whiteness. And I think that there's also the descendancy, the fall from whiteness, where, you know, and I all remember this, driving around Zim or even anywhere, kind of like, oh, white beggar. Oh, shame. I wonder what happened to him. You know,
Yeah.
you know, you kind of
a travesty. I mean,
travesty.
wow.
You know,
Doesn't
wow.
make sense.
Mm,
White
you know,
beggar, yeah.
white beggar. What happened to him? The world's not good. Anyway, I'm going to stop there.
So maybe if I could just share, you know, when I grew up, so I'm a Koekemoer, and I say it in the English way. Koekemoer is the actual way of saying it. But my family was both English and Afrikaans. My dad was an anglicized Afrikaans guy who joined the Air Force and then, you know, but his family is Afrikaans, you know. And when I would meet my cousins, there was a clear sense, you know, and I was trying to think of it earlier. It's like a magnet where there's a core, where the magnet is stronger in the core. And when you're closer to the core, you feel the pull. And when you're away from the core, you don't feel that pull as much, you know. And I remember, you know, the big conflict for me growing up was that I went to an English school and there was an Afrikaans school down the road. They didn't wear shoes. We wore shoes, you know, and that's how we differentiated amongst ourselves. You know, and then I had the good fortune of traveling overseas into Muslim countries and things like that, and then understanding the difference between Sunni and Shiite and the variances within that, and then being able to spot it. You know, and when I got to Tanzania, for instance, understanding that there were like 9 different tribes there, and that the one tribe was seen as the dominant tribe, particularly in government. You know, and as I left that society, I was starting to be able to spot that tribe's person, you know, because of the I don't know, you know, I mean, you know, and that's you know, and I think really what you're saying is in terms of there's this visual component and there's a visual response too, you know. So when you're close to the core, that magnet is giving you positive vibes, and when you're away from that core, that magnet kind of kicks you in the teeth, kind of thing, you know. And then you become you become very quickly aware of how to align yourself in those conversations, you know. So like for me coming down to PE, the first question I'm asked here is, well, after my name is where did you go to school? And to me, school was something to flee from, you know. I mean, it was a fine school, but it wasn't a particularly, you know, grade school. It was just a normal, you know. But again, you know, for me, as I say that, you know, and Glenn, the point that you made last time has struck with me very, very deeply. Is this this thing of timber, huh? Timber. Yeah, is that you're aware of the timber in that. So instead of magnet, maybe the better term is timber. Is the closer you are to the center, the closer you are to striking the note correctly, you know.
But what is that center though, Gary? I mean, we're talking about the levels of whiteness, the sort of like, well, I'm hearing ripples and vibrations, because at the end of it all, there's kind of that sense of, if there are many ways of whiteness.
I mean, you know, and maybe it goes to Nehemiah's point about the multiple truths, but there are multiple truths that sit in a center. Mm-hmm. That don't necessarily dominate each other, but they dominate the center. So maybe to use the term, there's an orchestra that you become part of, you know, and whiteness is an orchestra. It's not a single instrument. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes.
You know, but you know, you can walk into that thing and play an instrument that you think makes sense, but it doesn't. It just doesn't fit, and you get that feeling very quickly. But you know, so Glenn, I'm not sure if there's like a musical term for not a cacophony, but you know, so cacophony, as I understand it, is a disjointed sound. It's not a combination of sound. I don't know what you would term a combination of sound that a symphony or an orchestra creates. You know, so the group of timber is their group of timber. You know, because that's what whiteness is. You know, so
go ahead, Gary.
No, you know, so I mean, maybe just to end up with my experience is that when I was in, so I worked for a multinational Swiss-based company based in Switzerland, but run to a large extent by Swiss-German individuals. And we were talking about labor relations at one point, and they were going like, "Yeah, but you're from Africa," you know. And I was like, "Yeah, but no, actually, our labor relations is more advanced than your Swiss labor relations by far," you know. And they were like, "No, no, no, no." You know, and there I was different. I was a South African, and I was, you know, this ascendancy of whiteness. I wasn't quite at the top level, you know, and yeah. So sorry, Glenn, you wanted to come in.
No, I was just going to say, I think I actually like this metaphor which you used about the magnet also, because I immediately thought, oh gosh, yes, this explains perfectly why I struggle to be with my own community of color, because they've got a concentration of culture, of ways of being in this sort of core metropole of where they are located. And of course, because of the spatial apartheid in our country, those things have been exacerbated, where you find the communities of color have been grouped also according to class and poverty levels. But I do hear where you're coming from about the sort of idea of there being a spectrum, I think, of experiences, but that you could have a concentration. Because when you spoke about the cacophony, it reminded me of what Willie spoke about in his opening remarks, where he says, should all of the voices be heard, or how can we have all of the voices be heard? And immediately my mind thought, no, not all voices can be heard unless they're working in consonance with one another. Otherwise, you will get a dissonant cacophony. And I've experienced that in my own community, my own racialized community, for example, where colored people have, and I wrote about this with the first round of the Ischia iteration when Andrea published the papers in the book of philosophy, in the Journal of Philosophy, where I spoke about the fact that if there are too many narratives of what constitutes something, because the principle of self-affirmation or whatever it might be is open to all, then for people who are not a part of what is being described or being debated, trying to make sense out of it, they find themselves saying, well, now what is the truth actually? Which definition of what you're speaking about is the one that I can use to make sense out of this complexity? But if you're going to say to me that there are so many narratives, I have to consider then ultimately what is the value of that? Because if you're going to get people speaking beyond each other, also you're going to find that it's going to be very problematic. But it was just something I wanted to draw attention to, that you should have dialogue and you should have voices which are in consonance with one another. And the consonance could be the idea that we are trying to understand, as Gary pointed out, what our similarities and our differences are. Why and how? What are the benefits of doing this, and what are the detrimental aspects of doing this? How is it real, and how have we also given meaning to things which are perhaps not as real? But of course, this creates that binary perspective once again, which you run into, coming back to the point of what Andrea's seminar was trying to sort of steer away from. But consonance is always more pleasing than a dissonance, but a dissonance is necessary to create tension. A piece of music which doesn't have dissonance and tension and attention, it's also going to be rejected by the ear for saying, well, that sounds like a little nursery rhyme. You know, the human experience wants to have things which are complex, which are jagged, which are harsh, which are unexpected, which are troubling, but they want to see, can it come into resolution? And I think that's where we as humans are struggling. And that's where music is a very beautiful metaphor, is that you can take all of this dissonance and the cacophony, but you can still resolve it into a consonance ultimately, which is a worthwhile. But that's me going off on musical metaphors. But thanks for the little prompt, Gary.
Awesome, thanks, Glenn. Yeah, and I mean, so, you know, if you look at a forest, for instance, you know, a pine tree plantation versus a natural forest, I mean, there's lots of things that, but the eye can pick up what is natural and what's not natural, you know. And it's interesting, this, you know, in a symphony, if I beat that thing to death, that analogy to death, you know, you can you can have hundreds of instruments, you know, and then you
but
can.
There's only one conductor.
Yes.
There's only one conductor, and that's what's happened to us as humans. The white race has said, I'm the master of the band. Everybody's following my perceived sound of what this should sound like, and the rest of you are just players in my grand symphony. And now what's starting to happen is we are starting to get up from our seat and say, I'm not playing your trombone or your piccolo any longer. I'm bringing my mbira, I'm bringing my calabash, and I'm bringing my kora, or whatever it might be, and I'm throwing your composition out. They've even usurped the conductor's podium to say, and I think that's what's happening with whiteness. They're starting to reckon with the idea that now there's a new band leader in the front. Every group of musicians must have a band leader, because there are 5 different people having a concept of how this thing should sound. Go ahead, Vuli. I see I've spelled something.
Again, this analogy of the musical score is actually really wonderful, because we're going to just kill it today. When you said we only have one conductor, that is kind of like, that's maybe something that whiteness has in some ways evolved to make us think that there is one conductor. And one of the things that I kind of like sort of backpedal on is like, whose music are we playing? And maybe there's a sense of improvisation that needs to come from it. And maybe that's where the cognizance and dissonance, and you kind of like on the bassoons will do something and we'll call and response. We'll have a kind of like a jazzy interflow, rather than sitting there and these are staves and we need to play it according to this time. And this person at the front will say, no, not like that, this way. So I think the question of like, whose music do we play is also one of those things. There was something I wanted to come back to, which is that, you know, coming back to the question that Gary, when he asked, is it possible for a white person to be black? Is that what you asked, to not be white? Or I think, and we kind of like, yeah. But then I want to add to that, and as an addendum, is it possible for a white person to not be white without adopting in a patronizing way, or in a, you know, the semblance of another person's values and cultures? Like I keep coming back to this thing of like, whiteness is something you ascribe to. All those values are about whiteness measures success, whiteness, da. What would happen? Where does the measure of not attributing to that fit in if you're not trying to be white? Does that question?
Yeah, so I mean, I can demonstrate it for you quite easily. Is if I say to you that Ramaphosa is my hero, or that Mandela is my hero, the timber of that falls onto the floor and shatters into multiple pieces. You know, why is that? You know, and it is because you instinctively know that what I mean about what I like about Mandela is actually what Mandela, the whiteness of Mandela, not the because I don't, you know, when you talk about Mandela the terrorist, then I get a bit uncomfortable. You know, no, you know, so you know, no. I mean, you know, there is that. I think it was a woman in America that was outed as a white person pretending to be a black person.
Rachel Dolezal.
Yes,
what was the name again?
Rachel Dolezal.
Yeah, that's
the CEO of the NAACCP.
And she's still fighting it, guys. She's still fighting it.
Yeah, and I was just, you know, I'm fascinated by, you know, and I'm fascinated by the whole the trans debate in the UK between, you know, feminists and trans people, and, you know, what's her name, the Harry Potter author, J.K. Rowling. Yeah, you know, that she's been, you know, she's been vilified in some sectors badly, and she potentially just, you know, has justified that. But the level of depth to that is to me is fascinating. You know, is that you know, yeah. But
I think there's parallels. There's parallels, and I want to I use that example because again, I don't want to just talk to whiteness because it becomes that sort of binary one-track sort of thinking. And I think with the many truths or intersectionalities that Nehemiah is referring to, we have to remain aware of how those power structures do work. Even within that trans community conversation or any queer conversation, there is an injection of whiteness in there. There's an injection of a race issue, like you were talking about, Nehemiah, which is really important to keep acknowledging. Does anyone remember that case? The 10 babies has made me think of other weird South African stories, and I had to kind of reflect on this. But does everyone remember that case of Happy Sindane, going back a few years?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember?
Boy?
There was a little boy. Sorry?
Quick refresher.
Oh, he lived
with
at Tweefontein. He grew up there and came out into the news as someone claiming that he had been stolen by a black family and he was actually white. And there was that whole sort of like strange thing that happened. He became a public figure, and this whole question of like, what does whiteness mean in South Africa? Why is he ascribing to whiteness when he's actually had a life with these people? But it was kind of like a poverty issue. Does he want to be taken back to his white family? Who are this white family? And why would a black woman? It was just like really, really weird. And I kind of went back to that story, thinking of the current issue around the 10 babies existing or not. You're going to have some sort of like notes for people in the YouTube video to kind of like contextualize what I'm talking about. But but the fact that the whole nation engaged on this man's race, and there were questions about, you know, whiteness versus like, let's look at him, actually physically sort of dissected him and saying like, he doesn't look white. Oh no, wait, he's got straight hair and da-da-da. And at the end of it all, this poor man was found dead in a ditch, you know, not too long after this whole story happened. So for me, it's astounding that maybe even just now, while we're still talking about these measures of people. So I'm kind of tailing off here now as well. So I'm done. Over.
I just researched him and I'm like, okay, I'm interested. I'm intrigued. He's just popped up on my screen. But I wanted to talk to that issue of can white people be black people? Gary, or identify as black people. I think the problem comes in here with the concept of whiteness itself and blackness, right? Or versus blackness. That if you are Rachel Dolezal and you tell the world that you are a black woman, or all of the accounts that we've seen so far of people attributing to blackness are not assimilating into blackness the same way that black people's lived experiences are, right? I think the problem that there's a contestation that's had here that half of the time when white people assimilate to blackness, it is because of monetary gain, right? It is because there is a gain that comes from it. And also what many people who criticize this notion raises is that there's the option of stepping out at any point in time. So if out of blackness as a white person postulating blackness, there's the option of stepping out of it, right? So you can be there for the good times, and when the bad times start, you can kind of just sort of step out of it, right? So for instance, I saw this TikToker in South Africa currently, and I thought, this is odd, this is strange. And in the comment section, like people are like, oh, Diakfuna, I want you, can you be my man and stuff? Because it's this white boy who says, yeah, Shomfet, I'm a chair up a pandla, funamna, and funa atibafunu John, and it's this white boy that's doing this, and they love him. They are eating him up, right? They are telling him that, oh, like the black girls is like, I would date you anytime, and things like that in the statement. And I was just thinking about how he's able to perform that and gain a monetary substitute from that, right? Not only if it's not physical money, but he gets credit in the community, we award him. Yet the Thembas and the Sisipos that actually are that way, we ridicule and we shun in the community, right? And so this is where the problem comes in, right? He can step in as a white man into that space and assimilate that Blackness and be praised for it. However, a Black lived experience of the similar caliber as that is shunned and pushed aside. The opposite is true. And so here comes the challenge, right? When we look at it both in that way as the privilege that you inherit by performing Blackness, and then when we look back at the opposite of that, is that how Blackness in itself devalues itself for whiteness, right? Right. And so now when we have those type of conversations, I think there's that point of contestation where I think the Americans like to raise this word of good faith. Is it done in good faith? Right? They have this, when they talk about contesting issues like, is the intent or that? But sometimes I don't think the intent and purpose stands to reason when you look at the overall production of something. And I think this has largely shaped our understanding around things like cultural appropriation. You know, when big conglomerates can take the Sotho blanket and turn it into a Louis Vuitton creation, right? Without having no accountability towards that community, culture, or highlighting anything about the culture. I mean, there's nothing written in the brief about the design, about the culture and the people and how it influences, right? It's just saying that it's a textile from Africa, right? And so Louis Vuitton is selling those textiles from Africa for $54,000, right? A piece, you know, and that has done nothing to shape the story of the Sotho people. That has done nothing to enrich the story of the Sotho people, but the LVMH conglomerate, right? So when we really look at it in that way, I think that there's validity in saying that we should be cautious of white people wanting to adopt Blackness, because they have the opportunity to step out of that at any time, right? They don't inherit the discrimination that Black people inherit from by virtue of being Black. So therefore, that's rather the debate and the contestations around that issue of, can white people be Black, you know?
Have you seen those TikToks about those white guys wearing Buddha sort of like clothes or typical and dancing like
doing skuchwa
and I'm like, I mean, I can't do that. Yeah, like dancing to gum and all the rest of it. I'm like, what is going on? And it's not a defense mechanism of like, no, this is not okay. You shouldn't be doing this. This is appropriation. But I don't know.
I think, Vuli, we're going to have to explore each case on its merit, right? Because one of the guys in that video, for instance, is dating a yellow-blown Sotho girl, right? And they dance together on their separate channel as partners, right? And so I think really we need to investigate each case by case, but we can't disregard the fact that there's monetary gain there's status, there's wealth, there's things that comes with that is not being afforded to me doing the same movements in a farm Bura outfit, right?
Yeah.
Glenn, you want guys, I'm just conscious of time too.
Yes. Yeah.
I won't be long. I was just going to say it comes back to what I mentioned before about embodying a race, and this is where that I've not watched it. Am I the only one who's not watching TikTok videos? My students are also on my case about this. Good Lord. But apart from that, I think it, for me personally, brings back the white master again to the fore. And whether we might be oblivious of it or not, I'm not that sure. But it's the idea that here's a white man who's been able to master how to do Black embodiment, which is perceived as being so very, very difficult. And he's been successful at it. And it also contributes, I think, to a topic which you might want to explore in the future, perhaps, which I'm very interested in, which is cross-racial desire and fetishization.
Yes.
You see, which is a very real thing, and it's because it's such a taboo topic, there's not a lot of scholarship out there addressing it head on. People are again reluctant to speak about it, but for me, I say it's a very real thing once again. And it speaks also to what Fanan spoke about this idea of disowning your own kind because you've been inculcated with rhetoric so much about how it's inferior. And speaks again towards that old colonial concept of what I call the jungle fever, you see. And the American situation is quite familiar with this also. And then the idea of the alpha black male with his sexual prowess and his huge penis and his huge muscles and his ability to overcome a physical combat much easier than a white man. We don't like to speak about those things, but they've got a lot to do with what the values and devaluation of bodies are sort of playing out in society as. And I just think it's interesting that it's, for me, when I hear these stories about people going crazy, because I've studied it as well, where I've said, you see this white dancer dancing the Congolese circus dancing, it's such an anomaly. You're not going to find another man doing it like that. He's a master of it. He's been taught by the people. He's immersed himself in the culture. So there are lots of scenarios like that, but I don't want us to lose sight of, again, for me, this concept of it brings whiteness once again to the center of saying, can you see the white person, he's mastered it. And therefore we should revere the white persona for that. So I won't say anymore.
Glenn, thanks for that. Guys, it's 4:30. We've been going at it an hour and 15. And Glenn, maybe what we can do is then agree to take up that in our next session. Is everyone, so I mean, we haven't spoken about how many sessions we're going to do. Are we just going to keep on going until we run out of stuff? Or
well, we have to take a break for the recess. I'm sorry, Gary, but I need a recess break coming up, I think from the middle of July until the beginning of August or somewhere around there. I'm not certain.
When do we go on recess?
I think it's around about the 25th until the 8th of August, something like that.
Okay, yeah, okay, cool.
So do you want to take shall we take a 4-week gap and then come back?
I would love it.
Okay, cool. So I'll check with everyone on email just what a date suits, but I'll plan for sort of 4 weeks from now to resume, and then we continue. And maybe we start, Glenn, where you finished off. Is this fetishization?
Yes, I'd love to, because I'm very interested in this in my own research, also in how it relates to pornography consumption. So I'm very keen to speak about this and have this this conversation. So thanks for that, Gary. I think it would be a good prompt.
Yeah. I can share with you all white men's deep-seated fear. You know.
I'm starting to feel like we might need to kind of like bring like a reading that each of us have done at some point and go like, oh, okay, I found this text. You know, it's almost like it's almost like we're good at talking, but I also have when you started talking about the fetishization, there's a book I remember called Negrophilia. I'll see if I can find it for you somewhere.
Cool. Okay, guys. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, colleagues.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Very fruitful discussion. And have a good break. And we'll see you in 4 weeks' time.
No, wait.
Sorry. Is the break now?
The break is not now, Gary.
It's only July, because the recess starts on the 26th of July until...
Yes.
Okay, so we do one more session in 2 weeks' time, and then take a 4-week break after that, probably.
I think that's
Okay, cool. Won't someone just send me the dates, because I'm not in the academic cycle. So sure. Send me your break details, and then I'll slot it in accordingly.
Sure.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it, guys and girls.
Thanks for a great talk, everybody. It's always fascinating. Enjoy the rest of your days. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.